Good morning. Nate here with the Volunteer Tech Vlog on the Live Sound 101 YouTube channel. And I'm trying out a little new camera angle. I don't think I use this one too much, but the rear facing on the big screen on me, and then like the little thumbnail right here facing the road. So I think this is what Josh recommended. So Josh, I'm giving this a try because of you. Anyway, I wanted to talk about types of listening today. Have you ever thought about how you listen? Have you ever thought about whether you can improve your listening skills? This is a big thing. So listening is, half the battle. I mean, knowing how to turn a system on and off, knowing how to mix, knowing how to physically, what buttons to push to achieve what you want to achieve, or what you think you should be hearing in your mind's ear. Knowing the knowledge of how to operate sound equipment is half the battle. Being able to listen, I would argue, is 50% of it. Being able to actually interpret what's happening in a room and then know what adjustments to make based on what you're hearing. That's a difficult thing to do. It's not something that I think a lot of people probably just operate under the under the guise of like, it just is what it is. Like, oh, I hear this, so therefore I'm going to make this change. But do you really hear it? Have your ears ever played tricks on you? Have you ever thought you heard something, but then you realize you actually weren't hearing that? This happens a lot. Like, for example, before I get into the types of listening, a little story here. How many times have you been behind the mixing console at front of house, and somebody up on stage or in the room is, hey, can you turn so-and-so up in the monitor? Yeah, let me get on it. And as you're trying to find the right button, you're like, oh yeah, shoot, was that aux 1, aux 2? You haven't even found, as the mixer, you have not even found the right adjustment yet, and the person out in the room is like, yeah, that's good, that's better, awesome. And it's like, I haven't made a change yet. And they think they heard a change because they were imagining the change. So all that to say, your ears can play tricks on you. And I won't get into it too much in this because I got to do some research, but there's actually science behind some of that stuff. And you think you heard something, you actually didn't, but your brain processes it as if you did. So there's some weird stuff that happens. But anyway, without any further ado, the types of listening are critical listening, analytical listening. So those are like the two main types for like an audio engineer or somebody who is a volunteer training to get better at sound. So you've got critical listening and analytical listening. And then I would argue there's a third type, which is passive listening, which by nature, I think that's what all people do. All people kind of do passive listening. They're listening because their brain is doing all this stuff automatically, and they're interpreting it, but they're not aware of the fact that they're listening. Now, when you study sound and you really dive into listening, you can hone in on certain things. You can hone in on certain frequencies. You can hone in on certain, types of sound, and really focus your attention on a very specific thing. And I think by default, people are mostly passive listeners. Like if you just jump in your car and you pop on turn on the radio and you're listening to a pop song or something like that, like you're probably just listening to the words, but you're not like processing what they mean necessarily. It's just kind of there in the background, or like elevator music. It's kind of a passive thing. So anyway, let's get into and that's just, I didn't read about that anywhere, but that's just my hunch. But critical listening. So let's talk about the difference between critical and analytical listening, because this is important. Critical listening, like for example, would be listening for something like distortion. Like maybe the snare, the microphone on the snare drum maybe is clipping every once in a while when the drummer really hammers into that snare. I would say that that's critical listening, and that's something that you're listening to a very specific type of sound. You're listening to the timbre you're listening to the overall quality of the sound, and you're listening for that little bit of distortion. Another example, if I can think of one of critical listening, clipping is obviously one. Maybe, geez, can I think of another example? Clipping is like the only thing that's coming to my mind right now. But it's something that has to do with the overall quality of the sound. You know, like maybe you're listening to a mix and something doesn't sound right, and you realize that one of the microphones is muted. You know what I mean? So you can kind of hear something because you can hear some sound in the room, but maybe like the violin, for example, maybe the violin's not coming through the system because the violin's muted. But you can hear something, but you can't hear the reinforcement of what's going on. You can't hear the violin being reinforced through the system, so the mix would sound kind of hollow in the violin area. Maybe that would be critical listening. It's something that like a sound engineer would be listening for. Maybe realize, oh gee, that's the channel's muted, let me open it up. So then let's talk about analytical. So how is analytical different? So analytical would be is your guitar out of tune? Does what's happening in the mix fit into song form of some type? Is it are your instruments in tune? Are they making? Is there a note that somebody's hitting that's wrong? Like that's not something that you could measure with a meter critically, or you can necessarily listen critically for. But from an analytical standpoint, which you're analyzing the song, that something doesn't sound right. That's something. I mean, the easiest example is whether your guitar's in tune. That's a good example. So anyway, that's my little thought for today. In recap, the types of listening: you've got critical, analytical, and I would argue passive are the main three types of listening. And most people are just kind of passive listeners by default as they go through life. Even though their brain is doing all kinds of amazing things to analyze the sound, people generally aren't aware of those amazing things. So if you've got any thoughts on types of listening, or you think I missed something, please let me know. All right, guys, that'll do it for this edition of the Volunteer Tech Vlog. I will see you in the next video.